Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your Audio Amigo, back with another Audio Amigo review for you guys. Ziigaat continues to release IEMs, and as the creator of a now outdated Ziigaat Buyer's Guide, I think it's my responsibility to keep up with their new stuff. That leads me neatly to the Ziigaat Luna, a 6 balanced armature set priced at $380. This is Ziigaat's first crack at a full balanced armature set, featuring 6 fully branded units per side. Compared to other fully branded options, their pricing seems like it could represent a great value option, but does the sound hold up as well? Well, let's see. First, however, a quick disclaimer, the Ziigaat Luna here were sent to me by Linsol for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell these if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Linsol for sending me these, and thank you to all of you watching for your continued support. In terms of unboxing and accessories, the Luna, like the Crescent before it, features what I call the Mark III Ziigaat accessories package, and that represents a significant step up from the Mark II and Mark I accessories packages, let me tell you. First thing you get that's new is the Ziigaat branded leather carry case with the branded zipper and the much nicer quality leather. It has really decent crush resistance, a nice quality zipper, a mesh here on the inside, as well as a removable sort of organization tray that you can use to fit your IEMs, and it comes out easy in case you wanted to put something else in there. Very soft, so it'll keep your IEMs nice and safe. The ear tip selection has also improved. You not only get the same set of plain black Ziigaat ear tips as usual, these are a wide bore option, you also get a full set of premium liquid silicone ear tips as well as a set of medium foam ear tips, which don't fit me, but it's nice to have them around. Lastly, the cable is Ziigaat's new style of modular connection, including 3.5mm and 4.4mm connections in the box. Condolences to you Qtelix 5K users for that one. Overall, this accessories package is a big step up from what I'm used to seeing from Ziigaat. It's much more in line with what I and others expect at this sort of price range. A cleaning tool or cloth and a set of branded ear tips would have been nice to see, but overall, I think this is a nice level up for Ziigaat when it comes to their accessories. I mentioned the cable already, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. It's essentially unchanged from the cable that comes on the Ziigaat Crescent. You get the same black 4-wire twist with plastic insulation on the cable. There's no annoying microphonics or memory issues to report with the way it behaves. It wraps rather well in the hands. The amp connector, as you can see, is a friction fit modular connector with very clear indexing marks to make sure that it's easy to put right back on in the correct orientation. It's got Ziigaat branding and these sort of flutes cut into it to make it easier to grip and pull out of stubborn amps and things. The Y-split also has those same fluting on it, and the chin slider not only sits flush now, but also slides rather smoothly along the cables, keeping them nice and managed on walks or while you're out and about. The ear hooks are comfortable and they don't crinkle at all when you move them about. My one complaint with these also fluted connectors, however, is the stereo indicators are extremely difficult to see. They essentially consist of those dots there on the front of the connectors, and that's it. I will also give you my standard complaint of having recessed connectors on a non-recessed IEM, but again, it's a complaint that's only really valid for me and other people who find that sort of annoying. I would have liked to have seen laser etched LNR on those connectors, maybe a colored ring as I tend to prefer, but honestly, this more premium version of Ziigaat's standard issue cable feels much more at home on a $380 IEM like this. I definitely don't see myself replacing it anytime soon. The construction and build quality here on the Luna is what I'll say is classic Ziigaat. They have their preferred design and shape and don't really want to mix things up. What that means is full resin shells, metal nozzles with metal mesh over the ends, and the standard sort of Ziigaat shape with a serial number right there. Ventilation is also classic Ziigaat. You get a single large vent there on the back and nothing really else anywhere on the IEM. I did end up having pressure buildup issues with these, however. It was quite annoying. I'll talk a little bit about it later, but I was able to resolve it by using Tang Sancai tips to help ventilate things a little bit better. As far as overall build quality goes, this is built like basically any other Ziigaat IEM. I do see these lasting about as long as those other Ziigaat IEMs. They tend to be fairly sturdy. Sometimes the nozzle can come off or the resin will crack, but that's basically any IEM with this construction that'll have that kind of sort of issue. So yeah, built decently well. As I pull up the specifications for the Luna, you can see the model numbers on those BAs that I was talking about earlier. Low frequencies are handled by a pair of Sonian 39AY008. The mid-range is handled by a pair of Knowles 32873s, and the treble is done by a pair of Knowles 33518, just like on a lot of the other Ziigaat sets that use those as tweeters. As far as amplification go, these ran just fine out of my older or weaker sources, but these do change sound with higher output impedance sources or impedance adapters, so check that if you're interested in these, as the sound does change. Talk about that a little bit later. Weight is under 5 grams a shell, which is nice, and the nozzles are in line with the other Ziigaat IEMs at 6.2 millimeters at their widest point. Looking over the spec sheet, honestly, these are your pretty standard premium all BA IEMs. Biggest things that stick out to me are the all branded BAs and the price that they're asking for them, but outside of that, pretty typical. Time now for the cool wall, and Ziigaat's policy for designing their IEMs appears relatively unchanged. It's different colors and designs of sparkles on their sort of standard black resin. They range from simple to sort of abstract interpretations of concepts like on the Crescent and Estrella. The Luna here is an interesting design. The green color in the center only shows up in certain lighting conditions. You can maybe make it out here depending on the angle I hold them at. Some of the pictures have it showing up a little more. When it does show up, if you turn it on its side here, you can kind of maybe look at this as like a lake with a mountain with a snow cap on top, which is kind of interesting. Or you can sort of flip it 180 and you can look at it as like the geological survey of like a lake bed. You got the lake there, a layer of sediment, and then a metal or precious gem deposit underneath. Either way, I can't really interpret what they were going for with the Luna here. I think the Crescent is a much better interpretation of the moon compared to the Luna here. But they do look interesting, so I'll go ahead and be nice and put them in the cool category. Ziigaat, I think, needs to take a leaf from a few other brands and start mixing up their faceplate designs. If you line up all the Ziigaat IEMs next to each other and get a layperson to tell you which one is which, I think they'd be hard-pressed to tell which IEM is which or how much they all even cost. But maybe the Council of Ladies will end up really vibing with the overall design here. So let's go ahead and check in with them. We have a perfectly split verdict. 2 pretties, 2 not pretties, and a single meh. So I think it's safe to say that at best these are, let's say, polarizing. The comments and compliments has a score of 2 to 3, so maybe these are just overall uninteresting to the ladies. Let's try and see why by looking at their thoughts. Overall, it seems like the ladies don't really vibe with the Luna. Some complaints on the green and pink color scheme. Lady number 2 does like these, but it also looks like some of the other ladies are starting to agree with me that Ziigaat really needs to start mixing things up in terms of their sort of faceplate design. They all just sort of blend together after a certain point. In terms of comfort, since Ziigaat has a very similar shell design for basically all of their IEMs, comfort was fine for me, apart from that pressure buildup issue. The shape here is very traditional IEM as opposed to semi-custom. There's no wings, valleys, or bulges except for a slight one right there, but nothing really too crazy. The pressure buildup, as I said, was quite annoying. I tried solving it by sort of angling the IEM during insertion, but eventually I found myself resorting to the Tang Sancai tips for all of my testing with these. That was enough to solve the problem for me, but it might not be enough to resolve the problem for you. If you are sensitive to pressure buildup issues, I would recommend you maybe skip these. Personally, however, like I said, with the Tang Sancai tips, I was able to wear these for 3 to 4 hours at a time with no issues, but these wouldn't be my first choice of IEM to take on a plane, for example. As far as my wife goes, she doesn't really get along with any of the sort of big Ziigaat IEMs, and these are no exception, earning a score of bad on the tiny ears test. She could form a seal for maybe a few seconds, but it was very fleeting and it failed almost immediately. I would say if you've been able to wear Ziigaat IEMs with this shape historically, you'll probably be fine here, unless you are pressure sensitive, in which case maybe skip these. Let's go ahead and talk about the sound here on the Luna, kicking things off with the bass. The bass here on the Luna is what I would say good for a all BA set, and by that I mean The resolution is nice, the attack is nice, but the notes themselves are kind of lacking in heft or body. You just don't feel the same air moving sensation in your ears like you can get with a standard dynamic driver or even a bigger planar driver. Tiesto's Split, for example, has that big descending bass note right at the beginning of the track. It feels really soft. The decay just sort of gently fades away instead of having nice rumble all the way down to the lower frequencies. The higher frequency, bigger, deeper drops are all there. There just isn't as much rumble as there is punchiness. The higher you go in frequency, the better the bass is. The lower down you go in frequency, the softer it gets. That's classic for balanced armature bass, and I expected it. But, you know, it is rather nice in the sort of mid-range of the bass. It punches quite nicely. I would describe the Luna overall as dynamic sounding, but lacking in texture and rumbliness. I think it's really nice bass for a balanced armature set. If you're expecting dynamic driver bass, you probably will be disappointed, so just keep that in mind. Bass guitars and drums are fortunately in the happy place for these drivers. The bass in One Night in Bangkok buzzes really nicely. The strings have a really nice feeling to them. The decay and texture is very well done by these drivers. It's really only, as I said, the deep rumbly notes that have these Sonyan drivers really struggling, at least with this implementation of those drivers. Outside of that, though, like I said, the bass is very well realized. It has really nice dynamism, really good punchiness. It's quite good. I find that the bass presentation doesn't really bleed into the mid-range in a sort of very meaningful way. While the mids are quite clean, they do still have nice weight to them, and they don't sound overly clean, lean, and thin like some other all-balanced armature sets can. Afuera by the Caifanes has this great impact from the bass guitar and the kick drum. Pair that with the very forward-sounding guitars, the cymbals, the vocals, the keyboards, and it's a great replay here. There's no issues with masking or having one instrument sort of step on or affect another in a negative way. The vocals aren't really warmed over or tonally affected in a bad way. There's maybe a touch of lightness to the sound, but again, it's in more of that clean, resolving way rather than that like thin, papery way. Female vocals, I think, are well balanced. They're not tonally affected by the bass or the upper mids. Hananinate and Haruko's vocals in particular aren't hushed over by the bass. They also aren't made nasal and annoying by the upper mids. She sounds very impactful, very passionate, very intense in this track. Her backing vocals and instrumentation don't really take any attention away from her. She doesn't stand on a pedestal or anything, but she sounds nicely forward. Not really recessed or pushed back, which is how I expect her to sound on this track. I would say the mid-range overall here is very well balanced and very cleanly executed. There are no real tonal issues that bothered me, and I think it's very well realized. The upper mids and treble on the Luna are, I think I would say, a classic all-BA presentation. They're not so energetic that they get annoying or bothersome, but they have enough body to them that female vocal harmonics have a nice depth and airiness to them. They don't get bitey or piercing or sharp. Ana Toroja in the classic Hijo de la Luna, for example, she does get very breathy and whispery in the final verse, and you can really feel the vibrato in her vocals very intensely, along with that famous Castilian lisp in her voice. These can be quite piercing in some brighter sounding sets, very sort of grating, but here on the Luna, I didn't really find that they strayed over into the shouty, sibilant, or overly bright territory. Cymbals and instrument harmonics are more of the same. They're very energetic, again, without straying into fatiguing territory. The bell hits and the rim shots on the cymbals in As, for example, the attack on those hits is fast, the decay feels natural. I did get a little bit of tizzy tonality that you can get with these BAs on some cymbal hits. It wasn't enough to ruin the tonality overall, but it sounded, what I would say, is mostly natural. Most instrument harmonics, I'd say, sounded mostly natural. I never found it outright annoying or music ruining like on some other BA sets. The treble is honestly pretty safe for an all BA set, all things considered, and outside of that slight tizziness on some cymbals, I thought it was really well done with nice airiness to the sound. One of the reasons folks tend to want an all BA set like this is their technical performance. The Luna does not disappoint. The low end, I feel, is typical for a BA set, as I mentioned. It has no issues resolving the low droning notes of Massive Attack's Angel, for example, but they don't really hit or buzz the way I really want them to. They can sort of bleed together a little bit with that soft decay. The bouncier, punchier notes are quite nice, and while the deep notes hit well, as I said, the decay is just a little bit too fast and soft for my tastes. Not bad though, especially considering that these are BAs doing the bass rather than dynamic drivers. Where this set absolutely shines, however, is in my Waltz for Debbie test. All of the glassware and all of the barware noises were resolved, and the background conversation was nice and clear without being unnaturally forward. It was a very well-balanced and great showing for this set with that track. Compared to the other all-BA sets that I've tested, I would say that this is a step above. It's better than things like the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite or the Hartfield CU8, and it gets within touching distance of the Dunu SA6 MkII, roughly equal with the Myer Audio SLT6, which is also a very technical set that I feel can also equal the SA6 MkII. The performance can fall apart a little bit on the lower end of the bass, but that can be said for any of these all BA sets. None of these, I think, can touch the Cantor, which is still my baseline for all balanced armature performance under $1,000. As far as stereo separation and perceived 3D soundstage go, they're both quite nice here on the Luna. All of the cash register noises and the receipt paper noises from the intro to Pink Floyd's Money all sound very nice and separated in my ears. The track with all of its stereo effects didn't suffer from any claustrophobic or closed-in feeling, and the replay was overall quite nice. As far as the perceived 3D soundstage goes, the Luna won't really elevate poorly mastered tracks, but I felt it did a fantastic job with Hiroshima's Turning Point, the koto, the piano, the synthesizers. They were all imaged very well, with each instrument living in its own distinct space around you. The whole track had a very nice depth, sort of a front-to-back sense to it with some of the instruments. Overall, I would say the Luna is about average for IEMs at this price point, at least when it comes to perceived 3D soundstage and stereo separation. That is to say, it's pretty decent. Finally, like basically all other multi-driver Ziigaat IEMs, the Luna do change sound when you use a source with higher output impedance or use an impedance adapter on it. Pulling up the graph, you can see that it's what I call the classic V-shaped effect. It boosts bass and treble while cutting the mid-range. The Luna becomes more contrasty, with the mids sort of falling back a little bit. Honestly, I don't prefer it. While it can be fun for some tracks, I find that the BAs don't really like being pushed too hard that way. They can handle it, there's not that much distortion, but the edges of the bass notes get even softer, and the upper mids and trebles start to get a little bit grainy. If you're hearing the Luna that way, maybe try a different source and see if it makes a difference for you. You might have a source with higher than normal output impedance. The Ziigaat Luna then, in terms of tuning, it sounds to me like a warm-leaning, all-BA sort of meta-ish set. It's not exactly a new tuning, but like I said, it does lean vaguely meta-ish. Now, the all-BA market has a lot of heavy hitters and a lot of interesting options, let's just say. I've gathered some of my favorites here, as well as another Ziigaat set to try and figure out how it works compared to the rest of the family. I just wanted to say, when I did my A/B testing for this video, I did use the same Tang Sancai tips on all of these IEMs to get a level playing field. I always do that when I use an ear tip besides my standard W1 or CP145 testing ear tips, but on my Symphonium Prestige video, I did have a comment point out that I neglected to mention that in that video. So I just want to make it perfectly clear here. All of these AB and ABC comparisons were done using the exact same Tang Sancai ear tips, and I did the same thing in my Symphony Ears Prestige video, where all of those comparisons were done with the same Final Type E clear red tips. When something like this does happen, I will be mentioning it every time, so thank you to that commenter for pointing that out. We'll go ahead and start things off with what is currently my second favorite Ziigaat IEM, the Crescent, priced at $280 US, which is $100 less than they're asking for the Luna here. These two sets lean, as I said, vaguely meta-ish in their tuning, but the differences here are noticeable to me. As you would expect from a pair of horizontally opposed DDs, the bass presence here on the Crescent is just better. The texture is nicer, the attack and decay are more satisfying, it's overall more rumbly. As I said, it's just a consequence of using balanced armatures in the bass versus dynamic drivers. You just don't get that same air moving power that you get from the big dynamics. In the treble, however, the Luna is a little bit more sparkly, a little bit more resolving, and overall more technical sounding. I don't know where exactly the BAs are crossed over, but one thing I do know is that in the treble, these two are using the exact same balanced armature. The Luna just has two of them as opposed to the one in the Crescent. I did find the mids on the Crescent to be a bit more forward than on the Luna, particularly in instruments like guitar and piano. But overall, I did find the Luna to be the more technical, cleaner sounding listen, while the Crescent was a bit more dynamic, a bit more musical, a bit more fun, if you will. If you prefer dynamic driver bass and you want a slightly warmer, less technical sound that is maybe a tiny bit more of an all-rounder, I would still grab the Crescent. It's amazing, and it still is my second favorite Ziigaat IEM. However, for an all-BA set, especially something with a meta-leaning tuning with very nice technical performance, the Luna fits the bill perfectly. Even if for me it didn't unseat the Crescent as my second favorite Ziigaat IEM, this one did come very close. But enough of those hybrid sets. Let's bring in another 6BA set. This is the Myer Audio SLIIVO SLT6, priced at $450 US, and this is my personal favorite IEM from Myer Audio that I have heard. If you configure the SLT6 into its high sensitivity mode using these switches like I have done here, the sound on these two is really quite similar. The SLT6 does come off sounding a bit more V-shaped with slightly rumblier bass and sparklier harmonics with some instruments, but the Luna does do better with female vocals, and I think overall it is the safer listen of the two. The SLT6 can be a little sharp with some cymbals and instrument harmonics, but the extra bass energy can sort of help balance it out. If you don't want the slightly more V-shaped sound on the SLT6, you can flip the switches back to the standard mode, which is still a little bit brighter and sparklier, but the bass and lower mids mellow out a little bit more to help it sound more neutral-ish compared to the Luna. If that sort of versatility, the 4 different tunings, is something that you value, the SLT6 is a great alternative to the Luna, especially when it goes on sale, but at MSRP, the Luna is $70 cheaper and will be the safer pick if you're trouble sensitive. Speaking of IEMs with tuning switches, how about one of the more venerable all-BA sets on the market, the Dunu SA6 MkII, priced at $580 US, seen here in the optional red-blue colorway, which of course I had to get because y'all know I love different colored shells. Depending on how you have the switch positioned, the SA6 MkII here will go from either warmer overall compared to Luna to much warmer overall compared to Luna. Both of these will present bass in a similar way when the switch here is off, but the SA6 MkII has that smooth, more controlled upper mids and treble presentation that continues to make it a relaxing choice for all BA listeners. The Luna, by contrast, is much more forward with female vocal and instrument harmonics and is the more dynamic sounding choice, particularly in the treble, while I would say the MkII here is the safer, warmer listen. Both of these sets are using a similar arrangement of balanced drivers, of branded drivers, but in my testing, the technical performance here was ever so slightly in favor of the MkII here. The Luna honestly gets extremely, extremely close. Depending on what track you listen to, you might even prefer the technical performance on the Luna. I did give the edge to the MkII here in my testing. If you want a even bassier, even warmer listen, you can flip the switch on the MkII and get that warmer sound. But if you're okay with the more energetic treble and you just want the technicalities of an all-BA set like this, but for $200 less, the Luna can essentially be seen as a value alternative to the MkII. But if what you want in your all-BA set is bass, you pretty much have to bring up the Symphonium X Nightjar Meteor, priced at $600 US. The Meteor here really is what it says on the tin. It's a small size with massive sound. This is even bassier than the SA6 MkII with the bass switch on, and even though this is still balanced armature bass, this has a much better feel to it than the MkII with the switch up or the Luna. Vocals on the Meteor here are not as forward as they are on the Luna. The treble here is quite interesting. Generally, I found that the Luna was the brighter sounding set, but the Meteor has this sort of airiness to it that can be rather nice with some cymbals and on some tracks. It can also get a little bit annoying with others, depending on where your sensitivity is in the upper treble. I did find the Luna to be the more balanced sounding IEM, and I think it will be the more mainstream choice. But if you want sort of a bass head leaning, like warm, thick sounding all BA set, the Meteor has a very dedicated fan base, and I think it still holds up rather well even today. Wrapping things up then, of all the sets here on the table, the Luna is most similar to its little sister, the Crescent. Both of these I would consider vaguely meta-ish tuned IEMs, with the main difference being the more dynamic bass and the more present mids here on the Crescent. It is the less technical sounding set, but it is also $100 less, making it a great value option. Speaking of great value options, the SLT6 and its tuning switches are a pretty good alternative to the Luna, especially if this is on sale, but its more semi-custom shape and its unbranded drivers will be a deterrent to some. Personally, I quite like the versatility here, and the wooden faceplates I think are absolute stunners. However, if you want gorgeous wooden faceplates and tuning variety, you can always go for the SA6 Mark II. Maybe not as versatile as the SLT6, but you do have that switch that lets you choose how much warmth you get out of this sound. These are all also branded drivers, and the smooth but still technical treble makes it one of the most popular all BA sets even today. I really like listening to this one. Finally, if you have sort of tiny ears and you want something very small, the Meteor is all about balancing a big energetic bass with a treble that is energetic enough to provide balance and has some nice airiness at the top end for an extra pop of resolution and sort of shimmeriness. Where does that leave the Luna? Well, let's just say if I have it here competing with sets that are sort of 500-ish, 600-ish, and 600-ish, and it costs $380, it has to be doing something pretty well. But before I spoil any more of my conclusion, let's go ahead and pull up the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale and see how the Luna will land on it. Honestly, I think this is a pretty well put together package. The upgrade to the Mark III Ziigaat accessories has helped with the overall value proposition, and while the Luna might not seem like the greatest value when placed next to its little sister, the Crescent, or other hybrid sets, if what you want is specifically an all BA set, then I think the Luna honestly is a very compelling option. Compared to the sort of $200 to $300 class of all BA sets, the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite, the Hartfield CU8, the Rum Audio Blues, not only is this tuning different from those, but this is to me a legitimate step up in terms of overall technical performance and honestly unboxing experience as well. The Luna essentially to me feels much closer to things like the SLT6 and the SA6 Mark II than it does to things like the CU8 or the Orchestra Lite. It feels like it's much closer to these than to those. And as far as the things that I have tested go, there really aren't a ton of all BA sets in this sort of $300 to $400 price range, let alone that have the ability to compete with sets above their price range like the Luna can. The only real problems for me personally are this sort of nothing burger, confusing faceplate design and that pressure buildup issue. Now, pressure buildup issues like that are a common problem for all BA sets, and they've been cited on the Mark II, on the SLT6, and on the Meteor as well, so I'm not going to knock it too much for that. All things considered, I ended up putting the Luna here in the This Is Brilliant tier. It was just a really likable IEM to listen to. It was different enough from the SA6 Mark II that it didn't come across feeling like, oh, this is just we have SA6 Mark II at home. It has that extra vocal presence, that extra sparkle at the top end. If you're okay with a hybrid IEM, then yeah, you've got a lot of other options available to you, and maybe the value proposition isn't entirely there. But this feels like a good step above the $250-ish BA sets. And if you're specifically looking for an all BA set in this price range, I think this will get you a lot more for your money than some of those more affordable all BA sets. But there I go, getting ahead of myself again. While I think the Luna represents a great value in an all BA IEM, I don't think this is for everybody. If you prefer the way dynamic drivers handle bass, and I am one of those people, I think that you would be much better served with a more traditional hybrid IEM as opposed to the Luna here. This also isn't what I would call a neutral IEM, so if you want an all BA set for mixing or mastering purposes, then this will probably be a little bit too colored for you. However, if you specifically want an all BA set and you've had your eye on something like the Mark II or the SLT6, I think that the Luna can make a legitimate case for a more value-oriented option, as the technical performance is essentially on par with these two, and while the overall sound is a little bit different, I still think it's a very compelling sound, a very all-rounder type signature, and it will save you some cash. I, again, also think that the Luna makes a logical upgrade from something like the Orchestra Lite or the CU8, provided you're willing to change up the sound signature to something more meta-ish, a little bit warmer. And finally, if you've been looking to try an all BA IEM and you have the budget, I think that the Luna can be a fantastic first all BA IEM. It has a very palatable treble, it has nice bass, smooth mid-range. It doesn't feel as delicate and light and airy as other BA sets, but it still has plenty of that all BA flavor, particularly in the treble. I think Ziigaat did a fantastic job here with their first all BA set. That's going to do it for the Ziigaat Luna. It doesn't quite unseat the Crescent as my second favorite Ziigaat set, but it does get close. I just wish it had more DD style bass and better vented balanced armatures. Still an absolute winner though, especially if what you're looking for is an all balanced armature set. Coming up next, we've got the new FiiO IM4, which I think just released on Kickstarter not that long ago, but you guys know I like to listen to things for a little while longer before I script my reviews, so look forward to that one to see if you should head to Kickstarter and get on that one. But for now, as usual, thank you all so very much for watching. Huge shout out to my Compadres Club members. As usual, $5 a month, and you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make the channel more independent and less reliant on things like samples and tour units, which I very much appreciate. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.